Hello and welcome to today's video. So this is episode 2 of my Dark Tower series, and if you missed episode 1, I will have it linked above and below, so I recommend checking that one out first. So the second book in the Dark Tower series and the second book on my list is The Drawing of the Three. This happened directly after The Gunslinger. So just a warning, I am going to give spoilers for this because I'm going to give a summary and then I'm going to give my thoughts on it. Essentially, I'm making these videos because I plan on reading all of the books in the Dark Tower series along with some extras to enhance the journey. That ends up being like 30 books. So I'm going to use these videos when I get further down the line to just kind of refresh what happened in these like beginning books. But before I get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. I appreciate it very much. So now let's get into it. Ended up giving this 4 stars. I enjoyed this one much more than The Gunslinger. The Gunslinger kind of just dragged a little bit. There was parts of it where you didn't really know what was going on. I feel like that happens with a lot of beginnings of series. It's a lot of world building. This one, the world is established, Roland is established, who is the main character, and we're just kind of like boom, boom, boom right from the start. So this book is broken up into 7 parts, and each part has multiple chapters in it. Start off with the prologue. So Roland is continuing on his journey to the tower, and he gets to this like beachy area, which is a very big contrast from The Gunslinger, because The Gunslinger mostly takes place in the desert until we get to like, you know, trees and mountains and underground tunnels. And here he encounters the Lobstrosities. I did include a picture of the Lobstrosity right here, just because I feel like what happens with the Lobstrosities is a big part of the story. Just for a closer up picture. These Lobstrosities are vicious and aggressive, and they end up attacking Roland and taking a couple of his fingers and a couple of his toes. This is the start of the chain of events that happened throughout this entire book. He doesn't have any kind of medicine, and his guns end up getting wet, so the bullets are now questionable if they work or not, which makes it hard for Roland to kind of take care of himself and protect himself. On top of that, he starts getting an infection because he can't really clean the wound of his fingers and his toes, and he gets infected. And he's walking and walking and walking, and eventually he comes across a door. I have another picture of a door here, and it's just a door standing up, not connected to anything. There's the door jamb, like you can open and close the door, but there's nothing around that, no building. It's just a standalone door. And on the door has the words "The Prisoner." So he opens the door and he sees into an airplane. Like, we know it's an airplane. Roland doesn't know it's an airplane because he's never seen one before. And we're seeing through the eyes of Eddie, and it kind of gives Roland a sense of vertigo. I mean, I can't imagine watching through somebody else's eyes, but I imagine that would give me vertigo too. Roland ends up walking through the door. Like, what else are you gonna do? Like, he walks through the door and he ends up inside the mind of Eddie. They kind of share the space where Roland knows that he's in Eddie's body, but Eddie doesn't. He just kind of feels a little bit weird. The rules of this are kind of complex. I think I'm going to explain them all now, and then we'll just get on with the story. So they're sharing the consciousness inside of Eddie's brain, and Roland's body is still outside of the door. So if he was to come forward and take control of Eddie's body, Eddie's consciousness is just kind of watching his own body do these things and hearing Roland's thoughts and stuff. And so if he looks back over his shoulder, he can see the open door with Roland's body just lying on the sand back there. If Roland is holding something with Eddie's hands and goes back through the door, he brings those objects with him back through the door. And this is important. He can also bring Eddie's body back through the door, and both Roland and Eddie are in their own bodies with their own minds in the correct bodies inside of Roland's world, and the door is like still open. This is also important. So Roland is figuring out all these rules on the airplane, and he figures out that Eddie is a drug addict and he's actually carrying drugs like under his armpits and he's trying to get them through customs to sell them for his brother or something. And I'm like, I know what happened, but I just don't want to get all the way into the details. And the people on the airplane, like the stewards and stuff, kind of figure out what Eddie's doing, and they're watching him. And Roland knows that he can find medicine in this world to cure the blood poisoning and the infection that he has in his world. So he needs Eddie not to get caught. So he ends up talking to Eddie in his mind, explaining everything to him, and then they bring the drugs into Roland's world so that like Eddie can get off of the plane and everything. And Eddie does end up getting off the plane. They end up going to the drug boss, and I'm trying to like skip ahead some details because I don't want this to be forever long. But they go to the drug boss. They end up getting the drugs back. Ends up being a shootout because the drug boss thinks that something crazy is happening. Like, what kind of magic is going on where he just had the drugs appear out of nowhere? And like, why didn't he get caught on the plane? And like, how did yeah, the drug boss is skeptical, and so there's a whole shootout. Roland and Eddie end up going back through the door, and they end up finding some kind of antibiotics that they bring with them, and they close the door and the door disappears. Like, it's just gone. So now Eddie and Roland are both in Roland's world, and Roland takes the antibiotics and he starts to feel a little bit better, but he doesn't have enough. And now Eddie's starting to go through withdrawal, so they're kind of both feeling like garbage. By the way, that was chapter 1 called The Prisoner, and now we're on to chapter 2 called The Shuffle, I believe. They're kind of both just sick, and they're hungry and tired and going through withdrawal and trying to get over an infection. And they're walking and walking and walking. They end up coming across another door with the words, "The Lady of Shadows," I believe. Yeah, The Lady of Shadows. And it's another door, and Eddie wants to go back into New York, and he wants to go back to his world. He wants his drugs, he wants a cheeseburger, like, he just does not want to be in Roland's world. And there's like a shuffle, and Eddie threatens Roland's life, but Roland calls his bluff, and he goes through the doors. And now we're in Detta and Odetta's body. I have a lot of thoughts about Detta and Odetta, but I'm trying to get through the summary first. Stephen King describes Detta and Odetta as to having schizophrenia, so they are one person with multiple personalities. That is how Stephen King describes it. Important distinction. Odetta is this sane, sophisticated woman who's in a wheelchair, and Odetta is her alter that is way less sane, and she's just kind of evil. Like, when Roland goes through the doors, she's in like a department store, and she's stealing a bunch of jewelry. Roland immediately jumps into her body, takes control, and brings her back through the door. Like, doesn't give her an option of anything else. And that door immediately disappears. So eventually Odetta comes back to the present, and she's the character that we're dealing with. Her and Eddie kind of fall in love, and they're walking to get to the next door. Well, they're trying to. It's very difficult because Odetta is in a wheelchair, and it's difficult to get over the sand and the rocks and stuff. Like, there's no pavement. And then very quickly, Odetta switches back into Detta, and Detta is like the main person that we're dealing with for like the rest of this chapter. So she sabotages all the time. She like puts the locks on her wheelchair and tips it over, and like makes it difficult to push the wheelchair so that it takes them longer and longer. Like, she doesn't have any kind of purpose except for causing problems. Like, she doesn't know what they're doing, she doesn't know where they're going, she just wants to cause problems. Like, that's it. The whole time she's swearing, there's a lot of like racial slurs going on, and it's just a lot. At this point, we're in reshuffle, and Roland is getting sick again. His infection is starting to get bad again, and he can't really fight with Detta anymore, and he's just doing his best to keep living. So what they end up doing is Eddie takes Detta in the wheelchair to find the next door, and then once he finds the next door, he drops her off, takes the wheelchair back, and grabs Roland, and then brings him back. And when they bring Roland back to the third door, Detta is like gone. They can't find her anywhere. Eddie's kind of freaked out because he's still in love with Odetta, and he doesn't know if maybe a coyote got her, or I think there was like mountain lions or something, but he's worried that she got killed. And Roland's like, we don't have time to worry about this right now, we need to go through the next door. This is where it gets complicated, and this is where I start to get a little bit confused. So they go into the next door. I don't remember exactly what was written on the door, but they call this guy the Pusher. So anyways, Roland is in Jack Mort's body, who is the Pusher, and he's called the Pusher because he just likes to like kill people, like push them in front of trains. We end up finding out that Jack Mort pushed Odetta in front of the subway, and that's how she lost her legs and why she's in a wheelchair. We also found out that he dropped a brick on her head, which is what caused the schizophrenia. And then we also find out that he's the one that pushed Jake in front of a car. And so we see Roland's kind of struggle when he's about to push Jake in front of the car, because he wants to save Jake, but at the same time, if he saves Jake, then Jake won't end up going through a portal to get to his world, and he needs him in his world to sacrifice so that he can do something else. So there's like that internal struggle. So through this, we find out that, you know, Jake is a real person, where when I was reading The Gunslinger, I was kind of thinking maybe Jake is a metaphor, maybe he's a figment of imagination, but it's solidified. Jake is a real person now. So Roland does something different with Jack Mort. He very quickly takes control of his body and goes to this place where he buys more bullets for his gun. There's like a whole situation that was very enjoyable to read. I'm not gonna get all into the details, but he ends up going back, like finding his way back to the door with the new bullets that he bought, but he doesn't bring Jack Mort with him. He ends up killing Jack. This is also another part I'm confused, so I'm gonna have to like go through and read some like explanations of the ending of this book, because when Roland goes back into his world and there's Eddie and Detta is trying to kill him, but he like makes it back just in time to save him, and then all of a sudden Detta and Odetta are one single person and there's Susanna now, and I'm confused at that. And I definitely need to find some kind of explanation. Like, I don't want to just like jump right over that, because one of the later books is like, it's called Song of Susanna, which I believe is the same character. I could be wrong though. I mean, I've never read these books before. So as you can see, there was like a lot that went on in this book, and it was like way faster paced, and I just found it very enjoyable. It was like unlike anything I've ever read before. And now into some of my more like in-depth thoughts, besides just like, oh, it was fun, I liked it. So going all the way back to The Prisoner before the shootout, where Eddie is saying he's going to get his drugs back to the drug boss. So this is page 120. There's Italian between the drug boss Balazar and his right-hand man. I don't know who he is really. And I looked up the Italian, and nobody can really translate this Italian into English. Like, a lot of people are saying it's not exactly Italian. Somebody said it's a mix of Italian, Spanish, and Latin. And like a lot of other people are just saying Stephen King is just ignorant for this. So I don't know if it's bad Italian where he thought he knew Italian but he doesn't, or if he's kind of creating his own language. I don't know. I don't speak Italian, Spanish, or Latin, so I can't translate this, and the people online can't really translate this either, so I don't know what's going on. And then fast forward to page 218. This is in the Detta Odetta chapter. We're talking about schizophrenia and Detta Odetta having schizophrenia. I find this to be very interesting because I'm just very interested in abnormal psychology and mental illnesses and all this stuff. Like, I without sounding terrible, I do have a degree in psychology, so it's an interest of mine. So this is what I found. It's purely my opinion. It's just an idea. So this is when it's first told to the audience that Detta and Odetta have schizophrenia. I'm just gonna like read a quick line. This is coming from a paramedic. I don't get paid for this. I don't understand this. They told us about shock, but nobody mentioned schizophrenia as one of the... That's where it cuts off. Like, he gets interrupted in that thought. I do not believe this is schizophrenia. I believe this is DID. And let me just tell you why. So this book was published in 1987. DID, or dissociative identity disorder, wasn't in the DSM-3 until 1980. And the DSM is a diagnostics manual, basically. It's what psychologists use to diagnose people, and DID wasn't in the DSM until 1980, which is 7 years before this book came out. And it did kind of go in before the book was published, written probably. But DID was widely controversial. A lot of psychologists even today do not believe that DID exists. So I can only imagine in the 80s when it first got introduced and people would not accept that as a thing. Like, they just, no, it doesn't exist. I believe it does exist, but I'm not going to get into the reasons why because that's not what this video is about. Some of the descriptors in the DSM-5 for schizophrenia is delusions and other things, but like, it makes a point of saying there are no multiple personalities, there's no alters, because that's specifically for DID. I saw a comment on Goodreads that said that Detta and Odetta do not have DID, they have schizophrenia with multiple personalities. That is something that could be believed, 10, 15, 20 years ago, but as of right now, the DSM-5 is very clear that schizophrenia just do not have multiple personalities. Like, that is DID. But again, only an opinion. It definitely changes with who you ask because there are very many people out there who do not believe DID exists. But I thought that was really interesting, and I thought that it was kind of cool to see something from a different time period and kind of how it relates to psychological beliefs now. I thought that was interesting. So while I have like 300 more thoughts on this book, that's like all I want to talk about for this video. I really did enjoy it. I'm looking forward to reading more in the Dark Tower series. But before we get to book 3, which is Wolves-Zakala, I believe? No. Book 3 is The Wastelands. So before we can get to book 3, which is The Wastelands, Jimmy Mango suggests reading The Stand. This is the extended version of The Stand. So this has 1,153 pages. This is not in the Dark Tower series, but Jimmy Mango, who I mentioned earlier, has a suggested guide of reading all of the books in the Dark Tower series and all of the books that kind of interact in that world. Yeah, I mean, his video will be linked too. I also highly suggest watching that. It was really great, and that's the whole reason why I'm doing this in the first place. Anyways, because this is a pretty thick book, I don't think my next video is going to be this entire book. I think it's just going to be the first half, and then I will get to the second half in the video after that. So next video will be a two-parter. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.